What is the Immaculate Conception, and is it biblical? So the Immaculate Conception refers to the conception of Mary, Jesus' mother. It states that she was born without original sin. The best argument I've heard from Roman Catholics would be that she's essentially the Ark of the New Covenant, and the Old Covenant, the Ten Commandments, the tablets were very sacred and had to be stored in the Ark, and that the Ark was very holy and people couldn't touch it, and if they did, they would die in some cases. And so Mary's kind of the same thing, right? She has to be pure in order for Jesus to be conceived within her. However, what the problem with this doctrine is that it's not really backed up with Scripture. For comparison, the 119th chapter of Psalms has more words in it than the entire Bible does about Mary. So there's not much to really go off of. So the burden of proof is on people to prove that Mary is without sin. The text clearly shows that. And we see a plethora of verses that talk about the condemnation of all mankind, that we're all sinful, we all fall short. And at no point is there a clarification that Mary does not fall into that category, right? Obviously, Jesus is an exception because he's God, but there's no clarification that Mary is also exempt from that. And so it's really on Roman Catholics to prove it from the Bible, and I think it's a fair assessment to say you cannot arrive at the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception from just the Bible. You have to rely on other sources. And some Roman Catholics will be honest about that and say, yeah, they'll turn to the Pope, they'll turn to the tradition, magisterium, and different stuff like that. And fair to those Catholics who will acknowledge that, because at least they're being consistent and honest. But strictly from the Bible, no, you cannot reach that conclusion, at least not with a good interpretation. What a lot of people will do in the case of like the Ark of the Covenant, or another term they use is New Eve. The problem with this is they're over-allegorizing. An example I've heard of this is a pastor talking about the 10 pegs for the Ark of the Covenant, and how they reference Jesus because they didn't weather, and they built the foundation. Sounds really good in a sermon, but is it biblical? No. There's no connection that the New Testament makes to Jesus and 10 pegs, right? Anytime a reader looks at 10 pegs, then they'll think, oh, it's Jesus, when it's not. So that's a problem with over-allegorizing, and that's what's being done here with the New Eve, or the new Ark of the Covenant. In regards to New Eve, there's no real reference to it, but indirectly it would be the church, because the church is Jesus' bride. And in the case of the Ark of the New Covenant, there's no real mention of that in Scripture at all. And so the problem is, when we try to make these connections without a biblical basis, we start to form theology that is not based upon the Bible. And that is very dangerous. So we should make sure that all of our theology can meet the standard of Scripture.